There is a version of the empath story that gets told over and over in spiritual communities. It goes like this. You feel everything deeply. You absorb the emotions of everyone around you. You are sensitive in ways other people are not. You leave social situations exhausted and overwhelmed. You attract people who drain you. And all of this, the story insists, is simply the cost of being an empath, the price you pay for your gift. Carl Jung would have found that story deeply troubling, not because he doubted the reality of empathic sensitivity. He spent decades studying it, taking it seriously at a time when his colleagues wanted to pathologize it entirely. What would have troubled him was the conclusion. The idea that being perpetually overwhelmed and depleted is simply the nature of the experience, that the sensitivity itself is the problem, that the best an empath can hope for is to manage the damage. Jung did not believe that. What he believed, based on years of careful clinical observation, was something more demanding and ultimately more empowering. He believed that the abilities empaths possess are real, that they are sophisticated, and that the suffering most empaths experience has almost nothing to do with the abilities themselves. It has to do with how those abilities are being used. Because in almost every case Jung studied, empaths were using their gifts in ways that were precisely backwards from how those gifts were designed to function. That is what this is actually about. Not the softened, accommodating version of empathic sensitivity that tells you your exhaustion is inevitable. The harder, more honest version. The one that asks what these abilities actually are, where they came from, why they so often cause suffering, and what it looks like to use them the way they were meant to be used. The first ability, emotional field perception. Walk into a room and you know immediately that something is wrong. Nobody has said anything. Nothing has happened that you can point to. But the atmosphere has a quality to it, a tension or a grief or an unspoken anger, and you feel it as clearly as you would feel a change in temperature. You have felt this your entire life, and you have probably spent a significant portion of that life assuming the feelings were yours. Jung identified this as one of the most fundamental and most consistently misunderstood empathic capacities. He called it emotional field perception, the ability to accurately read the emotional atmosphere of an environment without relying on verbal communication, and he was unambiguous about what it was, a genuine perceptual capacity, not imagination, not projection, not sensitivity in the vague sense, actual perception of real information. He traced its origins with the same rigor he applied to everything else. In almost every empath he studied, this capacity had developed in childhood in environments where survival depended on reading emotional atmospheres accurately. A child who grows up needing to know whether the adult in the room is safe before that adult has spoken develops a nervous system that becomes extraordinarily skilled at detecting what is not being said. That skill does not disappear when the circumstances that created it change. It persists, it deepens, and it keeps functioning whether the person understands it or not. The problem Jung identified was not the perception itself. It was what empaths did with what they perceived. They absorbed it. They walked into a room carrying someone else's grief, and by the end of the day believed the grief was their own. They sat with an anxious person, and hours later found themselves anxious, with no understanding of where the feeling had come from. They moved through their days accumulating the emotional states of everyone they encountered, and then experienced profound confusion about why they felt so terrible when nothing in their own life seemed to justify it. Jung was clear about why this happened. The empath had never been taught the distinction between perceiving an emotion and absorbing it, and without that distinction, the ability functions like a system with no filter. Everything comes in and nothing gets processed as belonging to someone else. He described it this way: you see a tree and you do not become the tree. You perceive a color and you do not become the color. Perception and absorption are different things. The eye perceives light without retaining it. The ear perceives sound without being altered by it. Emotional field perception, used correctly, operates the same way. You register someone's emotional state with accuracy and clarity without that state becoming your own. The practice Jung developed around this was deceptively simple. Every time a strong emotion arose without obvious connection to the empath's own circumstances, they were to pause and ask one question. Is this mine? Not in a dismissive way, not as a reflex to avoid feeling, but as a genuine inquiry. Does this connect to something in my actual life right now, or did it arrive when I entered this space or encountered this person? That single question, asked honestly and repeatedly, began to create the distinction that had always been missing. Empaths who learned to ask it consistently found that a remarkable proportion of what they had been experiencing as their own emotional life was in fact accurate perception of someone else's, and that recognition changed everything, not because it made them less sensitive, but because it gave them back the authorship of their own inner experience. The second ability, unconscious pattern recognition. You have known things about people before they showed you. You have felt unease about someone before they did anything to justify it. You have sensed that a situation was heading somewhere you did not want to go before any evidence pointed in that direction. And you have probably, more often than you would like to admit, talked yourself out of what you knew. Jung called this capacity unconscious pattern recognition, the ability to rapidly and accurately assemble psychological profiles of people from information that is too subtle for most people to consciously register. Micro-expressions that last fractions of a second, inconsistencies between the words and the tone that carries them, the quality of someone's attention, the particular way they respond to something unexpected, the gap between what they claim and what they project. Empaths process all of this at a speed and a depth that other people do not, and the conclusions their unconscious draws from that processing are, Jung found, remarkably accurate. Not infallible, but accurate enough that dismissing them consistently, which is what most empaths do, causes profound and repeated harm. He traced the origin of this capacity back to the same childhood environments that produced emotional field perception. A child navigating an unpredictable or unsafe home environment becomes a specialist in threat assessment. Their survival depends on being able to answer, moment to moment, is this safe? Is this person safe right now? Will this change? And the nervous system that develops in response to that necessity becomes extraordinarily sophisticated at reading the patterns that predict behavior before the behavior appears. The problem, Jung found, was not the pattern recognition itself. It was that empaths had been taught, by a combination of social conditioning and spiritual framing, to distrust it. Giving people the benefit of the doubt was presented as a virtue. Judging quickly was presented as a failure of character. Seeing the best in people was presented as the spiritually evolved position, and empaths, who tended toward both sensitivity and a desire to be good, absorbed those messages and used them to override the very capacity that existed to protect them. They would sense that someone was unsafe and then argue themselves out of it. They would feel the particular quality of someone's charm that registered as performance rather than genuine warmth and then shame themselves for the perception. They would know, in the way they knew things before they could explain them, that a situation was going to cause them harm and then stay in it anyway because leaving felt like being unfair. Jung was direct about the consequences. Empaths who consistently override their pattern recognition end up in situations and relationships that their ability had correctly identified as harmful from the beginning. The suffering that follows is not a mystery. It is the predictable result of a reliable instrument being systematically ignored. He was equally direct about the correction. The correct use of pattern recognition is not complicated. It is trust, not naive trust in everyone you meet. Trust in what your own nervous system is telling you about who you are meeting. When the ability flags someone as unsafe, you do not need to announce it. You do not need to justify it or convince anyone else of it. You simply need to honor it in your own behavior. Maintain the distance that the information is asking you to maintain. Empaths who learned to do this described an experience Jung found consistent across his case studies: the relief of no longer having to argue with themselves about what they already knew. The particular clarity that comes from acting on accurate information rather than suppressing it in the name of fairness to someone who has not yet demonstrated that they deserve it. The third ability: the perception of what people are not showing. There is a quality of attention you bring to people that goes beneath the surface they present. You sense what is moving underneath someone's composure. You register the emotion that is doing the actual work behind the words being spoken. You can sit with someone who is performing confidence and feel the fear that confidence is covering. You can listen to someone's story and perceive the wound that is driving it, the one they have not named and possibly do not consciously know. Jung understood this as the perception of what he called the shadow, the psychological material that people carry without being aware of it, the parts of themselves they have pushed outside the boundary of their conscious identity, the unintegrated anger, grief, shame, or need that operates from below the surface and shapes behavior in ways the person cannot account for. Most people cannot perceive this in others because they have not been willing to perceive it in themselves. The shadow is, by definition, what we have refused to look at. And what we have refused to look at in ourselves, we tend not to see in others either. Empaths are different. Their nervous systems register shadow material automatically without the filtering that most people apply. This capacity is genuinely valuable in contexts designed to support psychological growth. Jung saw it operating powerfully in therapeutic relationships. An empath in a clinical setting could perceive what a patient was not saying, what they did not know about themselves, what was driving the patterns they could not understand. That perception, handled skillfully, could accelerate the kind of insight that takes years through purely analytical means. In personal relationships, however, Jung observed this capacity being used in a way that caused enormous damage, not to others, but to the empath themselves. Because when you can see someone's wound clearly, the empathic impulse is to heal it. When you can feel the suffering beneath someone's behavior, the natural response is to want to alleviate it. And empaths, more than almost any other people, organize their relational lives around that impulse. They stayed in relationships with people whose unintegrated shadows made them harmful because they could see the hurt beneath the harm. They excused behavior that damaged them because they understood the wound driving it. They confused understanding the cause of someone's difficulty with being responsible for its resolution. Jung did not mince words about this. Understanding why someone causes harm does not make them safe to be near. Perceiving someone's wound with complete clarity does not obligate you to sacrifice your own well-being in service of their healing. The ability exists to inform your choices about relationship, not to conscript you into healing work you were not asked to do and that the person may not even want. He called the correct application of this capacity compassionate discernment. You see the person completely, what they show and what they hide, what they know about themselves and what they do not. And you use that complete picture to make wise decisions about how close you allow someone without needing to fix what you can see or announce what you perceive or stay in proximity to someone whose shadow makes them genuinely unsafe to be near. The difficulty of this for empaths was real, and Jung acknowledged it, because the ability to see someone's wound clearly can feel like a kind of intimacy, like a special connection, like proof that you understand this person in ways others do not, which is often true. And leaving someone you see clearly can feel like abandoning them in their most vulnerable place. What Jung offered in response to that feeling was a reframe that many of his patients found both difficult and liberating. Seeing someone clearly is not the same as being responsible for them. You can perceive someone with complete accuracy and full compassion and still choose not to be in their life. Those are not contradictory positions. They are, in fact, the position of someone who has genuinely learned to use this ability as it was meant to be used. The fourth ability, the sense of where things are heading. You have known how things were going to end before they ended. You sat in a relationship in month 4, and felt the quality of something that would not hold, even though there was no concrete evidence pointing toward collapse. You sensed a situation turning before the turn was visible. You felt the particular texture of an ending approaching while everyone around you was still planning for continuation. Jung documented this capacity extensively and was careful about what he called it. He did not call it prophecy, he called it trajectory perception, the ability to read the subtle directional indicators that precede larger movements and to extrapolate from them with accuracy. Because empaths perceive so much more information than most people, their unconscious has access to patterns that are genuinely predictive. Early-stage signals that most people cannot detect until they have already manifested into situations that are much harder to navigate. The suffering this capacity caused came almost entirely from one source. Empaths perceived where things were going and then refused to believe what they perceived. They replaced the accuracy of their read with hope. Maybe it will change. Maybe I am being too pessimistic. Maybe I am creating what I fear by focusing on it. And they stayed in situations their ability had already shown them the trajectory of, sometimes for months or years, until the ending they had sensed from the beginning finally arrived. Jung described this pattern with a phrase that stayed with many of his patients. Hope in this context is not optimism, it is self-abandonment. Because what you are abandoning when you override trajectory perception with hope is not pessimism, it is accurate information. You are choosing to ignore what your own nervous system is telling you because the truth it is communicating is not the truth you want. He was also clear about what the correct use of this ability offered in exchange for the difficulty of using it honestly. Lead time. If you can sense a relationship failing, you have months to process that reality and make practical decisions rather than being devastated without warning. If you can feel a situation deteriorating, you have time to create alternatives rather than being caught without them. The ability is not punishment, it is preparation, but only if you are willing to act on what it shows you rather than hoping it will show you something different. The fifth ability, energetic resonance. This one is the most physiologically real and the most destructive when it operates without any degree of conscious control. You do not just perceive other people's emotional states. Your nervous system synchronizes with them. You sit with someone who is anxious, and your body moves into anxiety. You spend time with someone who is grieving, and hours later you are carrying a sadness whose origin you cannot identify. You encounter someone in chaos and find yourself feeling chaotic in ways that persist long after the encounter has ended. Jung traced this capacity to one of the most fundamental biological mechanisms in human development, the ability of a caregiver's nervous system to attune to an infant's state, to resonate with a preverbal child so completely that the child's needs become perceivable before they can be communicated. This is not metaphor. It is physiology, and in empaths, this mechanism remains not only active, but extraordinarily sensitive throughout their lives. The problem is not that the mechanism exists, the problem is that it operates without discrimination. The nervous system that resonates with a grieving infant does not automatically know to limit that resonance to appropriate contexts. Without conscious intervention, it resonates with everyone: the anxious colleague, the depressed friend, the stranger on the train whose energy has a quality that lodges itself in your body for the rest of the day. By evening, the empath has cycled through a dozen different emotional states that belong to a dozen different people and has no clear sense of what their own actual state even is. Jung developed a practice he described as conscious activation and return. The principle was straightforward. Resonance is a tool that can be deliberately engaged and deliberately disengaged. You can choose to attune to someone in a moment that calls for deep support and then choose to return to your own baseline when that moment has passed. The choice does not have to be dramatic. It does not require ritual or announcement. It simply requires the intention to separate what is yours from what you have temporarily shared. He observed that empaths who learned to do this could still offer profound presence and attunement to the people who needed it. What changed was not the depth of the connection available in those moments, but the persistence of the other person's state in the empath's body after the moment had ended. They could be fully present and then genuinely return to themselves, not because they had become less sensitive, but because they had learned to treat their sensitivity as something they could engage consciously rather than something that simply happened to them. The sixth ability, dimensional perception. You live in more than one layer of a conversation simultaneously. You hear what someone is saying, and you are also aware of what they are not saying. You see the story they are presenting, and you perceive the fear or the wound or the unexplored pattern that is shaping the story without their knowledge. You register the inconsistencies between intention and impact, between what someone believes about themselves and what their behavior actually reveals. Jung found this capacity invaluable in clinical context. The ability to hold all the layers of a person's communication simultaneously without collapsing them into a single coherent narrative prematurely allowed empaths to perceive things about people that even extended therapeutic relationships sometimes struggled to reach. In ordinary life, it created a particular kind of loneliness, because you are rarely fully inside the conversation you appear to be in. Part of you is always tracking the other dimensions, the unspoken, the contradictory, the thing the person in front of you cannot see about themselves. And that awareness, held indefinitely with nowhere to go, becomes a kind of burden. What empaths consistently did with it, Jung found, was attempt to resolve it. They would name the inconsistency they perceived, point out the pattern the other person was missing, try to bring the unspoken into the conversation before the other person was ready for it. And this, however well-intentioned, made them exhausting to be around, because nobody wants to be perpetually seen through. Nobody is ready to have all of their layers simultaneously acknowledged, even by someone doing it with genuine care. Jung's instruction here was precise and demanding. Dimensional perception is not permission to manage other people's awareness. Seeing something clearly does not mean it needs to be said. Most of what you perceive in others is on a timeline that belongs to them, not to you. Your role is not to accelerate that timeline. Your role is to use what you perceive to inform your own choices about relationship and engagement, while extending to others the patience of allowing them to arrive at their own understanding in their own time. The practice this required was what Jung called holding without transmitting. You perceive all of the layers. You hold that complete picture internally. You let it inform how you are present with someone without making it the explicit content of the conversation. And you release the compulsion to fix or reveal or accelerate. This is harder than it sounds for empaths, because the impulse behind it, the desire to help people see themselves more clearly, is genuine. It comes from care. But Jung observed that the empaths who learned to hold perception without feeling compelled to transmit it immediately became far more effective in their relationships than those who could not. Because presence that does not demand anything from the other person creates a different kind of safety, one in which people often begin to see things themselves that they could not access when they felt observed. Here is what connects all 6 of these capacities. None of them were designed to make you a better servant to other people's needs. That is the version of empathic sensitivity the spiritual marketplace sells, and it is precisely backwards. Every single one of these abilities, the emotional field perception, the pattern recognition, the shadow detection, the trajectory perception, the energetic resonance, the dimensional awareness, was designed first and foremost as navigation equipment. Sophisticated, extraordinarily precise equipment for moving through the world with awareness and discernment. The empath who uses these abilities as they were designed is not soft and accommodating and perpetually available. They are boundaried and precise and selective in ways that can look, to people who knew them before, like a loss of warmth. It is not a loss of warmth. It is a reclamation of function. The warmth that remains when it is no longer compulsive, no longer driven by the need to rescue or absorb or fix, is more genuine than anything that came before it. Because it is freely given rather than extracted, Jung's framework for all of it was disarmingly simple. These abilities exist to serve you first, the way good equipment serves the person using it. A compass does not help you navigate if you are too afraid to look at where it is actually pointing. Your capacities do not protect you if you consistently override what they are showing you to maintain a version of events that feels more comfortable. The empath Jung was working toward was not someone who had quieted their sensitivity, or numbed their perception, or built walls around themselves. It was someone who had learned to inhabit their abilities with full consciousness, who perceived without absorbing, who recognized patterns without feeling obligated to rescue what they recognized, who saw shadow material and used it for discernment rather than a mandate to heal, who trusted trajectory perception and acted on it honestly, who resonated deliberately and returned to themselves afterward, who held dimensional awareness without making it everyone else's problem to live up to. That is not a diminished version of the empathic experience. It is a matured one. It is what the sensitivity looks like when it is no longer running you and you are running it. When it is no longer the thing that happens to you and it is the thing you have learned to use. Jung believed that empaths, used correctly, represented something genuinely significant in human psychology. Not because they suffered more beautifully than other people, but because the capacities they carried, when brought into full conscious function, allowed them to navigate reality with a depth of perception that most people could not access, to see what was actually happening beneath what was being performed, to make choices based on what was real rather than what was presented. The question is not whether you have these abilities. If you are an empath, you have them. They are functioning right now, whether you know how to use them or not. The question is whether you are using them as tools or whether they are using you as a conduit, whether you are the one choosing when and how to engage these capacities, or whether they engage automatically and leave you depleted, overwhelmed, and confused about what is yours and what is not. Jung would tell you that the answer to that question is not fixed. It is learnable. And learning it does not cost you the sensitivity that makes you who you are. It gives you, possibly for the first time, the experience of what that sensitivity was actually for.